Hi, I'm Meredith, and this is Harrison, and we are P1 Picks, a Formula One betting podcast, here today to talk to you guys about rear wings. So, just to give you a little bit of like a peek behind the curtain, Harrison will find one thing and then dive into every variation of how it'll relate to a race. I think where we started this journey was with an Andrea Stella McLaren quote. Tell me about rear wing.
I think this is almost, we talked about tire temperatures, why that matters last week. Let's talk a little bit about rear wings, what we can learn from the pictures that we're going to see Thursday on the pit lane as we get ready for this awesome Imola weekend, one of the most important weekends in Formula One coming up. With that being said, I want to start here with a quote from Stella, team boss of McLaren, who I think gave us some really awesome insight after McLaren's win in Miami on Sunday. He says two really important things. He says, hey, we had a really good top speed here in Miami. We knew that was an advantage. You know, we've competitively had in the previously, we've struggled in the back foot on the straights. You know, one of the reasons that we decided that we were struggling, you know, on the straights was because we had too large of a rear wing. So we knew that if we wanted to go fast down the straight of Miami, we needed a relatively light rear wing. Now, this is where the quote gets really interesting. We knew that we could run a small rear wing because we had added more downforce through the floors and the side pods of the vehicle. So why this is so important. The teams are all going to run different rear wing specifications. However, we know that teams that run less rear wing and still are able to get a lot of downforce are producing more downforce via the side pods and via the floor of the vehicle. So, the rear wings give us insight into how efficient or how inefficient a car is down the street.
Yeah. Let me just jump in right here. So this is one of the ways that people that may be newer to Formula One can kind of be like, what am I actually looking at when I'm looking at these free practice times? And rear wing and downforce and all of this information is the why behind why we think there'll be certain efficiencies in certain bets.
Yep.
The rear wing, this is like such a perfect example of you not having to be an expert, but like if you know what you're looking for, little things here and there. I think this Alpine example is a great. Can you kind of talk to us about this from Miami last week?
Yeah, so let's look at these two different Alpine wings that they were testing going into free practice one. One has a much larger spoon section, and that spoon is going to give more downforce, right? There's more downforce here, but also there's more drag, right? As you go down the straight, more air is going to be restricted by the larger rear wing concept here, but around the straights, this is going to produce more stability and it's going to give you more downforce on the rear. While Ocon decided it was more important to run a smaller rear wing, but to be able to go faster down the straight, right? Less air resistance is generally going to mean that all things being equal, the car should be faster down the straight. So this is a great comparison, right? This setup means Gasly has the ability to be faster at corner exit. He has more downforce under braking. But this also means that any time that there's a straight, any time that you're on the power, Ocon should be ahead because he has less air resistance in that rear wing. One piece that we want to dive in and take this one step further, as the top three teams bring upgrades, right? As we know, Red Bull is bringing a significant upgrade according to their team. We know that Ferrari's been testing their upgraded Evo car in the Fiorano test track yesterday, which means they have a new side pod and new floor as well. We've heard rumors of a Mercedes update, right? We know that Mercedes will be bringing updates over the next 3 to 4 races. We know that there are going to be updates to the side pod and the floor here as well. So looking at the rear wings on Thursday, especially between McLaren, Red Bull, Ferrari, and Mercedes, is going to give us a good idea for which team is seeing great aero efficiency, right? Which seeing a really skinny, is able to get away with a really skinny rear wing in Imola where you want, a lot of downforce because there's, sector 1, sector 2. But when you think about the long straight, the long back straight, the long front straight, you want a car with a very small rear wing so you're able to get the car to go as fast as possible with as little air resistance as possible. Rear wings are fantastic because they give us insight into how efficient or inefficient the underbody of a Formula One car is.
Well, and could this be one of the reasons? I know going into Miami, we knew McLaren was coming with an upgrade that
Yep.
might have brought 1 to 2 tenths of an increase in like speed.
Yep.
What we ended up with was a 4 tenths increase on
Yep.
race day.
Yep.
This rear wing and that understanding, that quote by Stella just saying these are the different things we relied on. Do you think that's why we saw such a jump in performance? And conversely, is that something that we could potentially see Red Bull improve even further on, or it was that one of the things we typically look at when we're talking about upgrades?
Yeah, and so I think, that's a really good question. I think what it says to me is the most important upgrades, the uptimes that are going to deliver the most lap time are going to be floors and side pods, because when you upgrade the floor and the side pod of the car, you're able to create downforce without creating and adding a lot of drag. Whenever
Got
you
it. Okay.
upgrade the rear wing, you're adding downforce to the car, but you're also adding drag. That's why the back part of this is important. It's always more efficient than putting downforce on with the rear wing. So what Stella is telling us here is anytime your side pods and your floors are upgraded, you're always going to find more lap time there than putting a rear wing, right? A bigger rear wing is a crux. It's uh, it's something that you use to kind of save the car if you're not getting enough downforce on the rear axle, and that's what we see Mercedes doing, right? This should have been an insight to us that Mercedes was going to be a step behind the top teams, just simply looking at how much downforce they needed to bolt on the rear wing to get the car to work.
Got it. Okay, so fundamentally, then,
Yep.
if we have fixed or if we have upgraded the side pods and the floor, then we're
Yep.
not going to be so reliant on having a rear wing that gives as much downforce.
Yep.
So the fact that McLaren nailed those upgrades, we then see it even because obviously we can't see the floor. The rear wing is an easy way to look at and kind of give a barometer of where, what we're expecting out of the overall upgrades. That's super interesting. And I think too, going back to Miami again, just the Aston Martin and kind of what happened with their potential upgrades. I feel like this might be correlated to that as well.
Yeah, and I think that's, the last piece to maybe look at here was that we know that Aston was trying to, roll out a low drag configuration that would make them more competitive in a straight line. We know that they had to revert back to a previous rear wing, right? They had to go back to a higher downforce rear wing because the car was sliding around too much, right? So it seems like Aston Martin was not able to produce enough downforce with the side pods and the floor, and because of that, they had to bolt on a higher rear wing, which means they were slower down the straight. The most
Mhm.
important piece that I think from, the McLaren team boss here is, if we started again, maybe the choice would be different. I think he's admitting that if we were able to put more downforce on the body and with the floor, we would not have needed to bolt on a larger rear wing. And at the end of the day, that was a big deal because we didn't have the amount of top speed that some of the other teams did.
That kind of proves the point, right? Like, so it wasn't a decisive factor, but it wasn't enough to overcome, not having nailed it other places.
You really want to look at in betting insight is that Sonoda is plus 100, about even odds to finish in the points. One
Yeah.
thing we really want to look at going into Imola is what kind of rear wing is the Racing Bull going to have, right? How small, how large is the Racing Bull wing going to be compared to maybe what we're seeing from Alpine, maybe what we're seeing from Williams, maybe what we're seeing for Aston Martin, because this is going to give us an idea for how efficient that vehicle is. And I think Red Bull Racing Bulls in particular is going to be a good P10 bet as we look at Monza. So that's the important piece is the rear wings give us an idea for how efficient the car is. If we can have an idea for how efficient the car is, how efficient the floors and the underbody are, we can have an idea for how efficient that car is, and we can have a little bit more insight than Vegas does when it makes time to bet on who's going to finish in the points.
I love it. That's literally the whole point of this
That's
podcast, which
literally
is
the
just
whole
to
point.
kind of know what we're looking at. And this was super helpful in understanding that because there's a why behind all of these results, right?
Yep.
And other than, Red Bull just being good at stuff.
Yep.
These are kind of the explanations behind that. I think rear wing is something that as a more casual fan, I did not have as much context for by any means, but I love a good like cheat sheet. Like I love it
Yep.
like, oh, just let me look at at these one or two little things, and I'll have an idea, a context for how this race might go in the weekend. And again, we are excited to see kind of those first pictures from Thursday, what those look like, and sounds like we've got upgrades across the board from the top teams,
We will
and
have
it's going to be,
another episode coming out about
yeah,
upgrades, but yeah, we wanted to talk to you guys about rear wings matter. What can we learn from rear wings? What betting insight can we learn? And what does that tell us about the floors and the underbody?
love it. It was great. Thank you so much, Harrison. This has been P1 Picks with a deep dive into rear wings, why rear wings matter. And we will come back to you in a few days with more talk about Imola upgrades and why we think that Imola might be the most important race of the season. We'll just leave it at that as a little cliffhanger.